Thanks, Leon. Afternoon, everybody. Firstly, apologies for my voice. I've had sort of flu and COVID. I'm getting over both of those, but hopefully it will hold up for the duration. So I'm Gabriel Staples. I'm the product manager for construction and engineering. I am also joined by Everin Alibaba, who's the subject advisor for engineering, construction, and design technology. So in the background, he can handle the chat whilst I present. But feel free to put any questions in the chat, or afterwards we can have a verbal Q&A as well. So this briefing session shouldn't take too long. It's just to bring you up to speed following the latest announcements from government, the new Labour government in December, and really just the idea is to explain what we've been doing, where we've come from, where we are now, and what's the implications on the future for your delivery of construction qualifications. So we're going to cover the background, resources for the new qualifications we're launching, what's happening at level 2 as well, and next steps and Q&A. So in terms of the background context, this is where we've come from and where we are to bring us up to December, so up to last month. We've been working on the assumption that construction with the T level, following initial guidance in 2021, the T level being the main offer in construction. We've been working on the assumption that BTECs will be defunded. During that process, they then said that we could actually develop alongside the T level a small alternative academic qualification, which is a vocational qualification that will sit alongside that, but that nothing else would be allowed, and therefore the defunding would happen on a certain date. Those dates have changed slightly. So in the summer, when the new government came in, they did allow the funding for BTECs, all sizes of BTECs in construction, to carry on just for this current academic year. And then just in December, they announced, mid-December, they announced that the pause and review that they'd been looking at for the cycle 1 sectors, things like engineering, health and social care, computing, IT, construction, those couple of sectors that were first up for reform, they announced that they would for each sector, what their plans were for each sector, which I'll come on to explain. So the pause and review essentially allowed centres to keep delivering for at least this academic year, and then make a decision for the next couple of years ahead of a much bigger curriculum assessment review that they are concluding next year. So it's all fairly complicated, and it's been a moving feast. But the rapid review was the thing that impacted most last year, and that was that on the cycle 1 subjects, the things like construction and engineering and so on, the initial decision to defund anything that overlapped with a T level, which is majority of qualifications in those areas, that decision was paused, and then they had some outcomes after speaking to industry, after speaking to, I say they, the government, DFE and so on, after speaking to industry, speaking to colleges, speaking to awarding bodies, they've made some conclusions. The outcomes then for construction, first step was to sort of cull the qualifications that had low demand. So obviously the low hanging fruit, I suppose, was for the government side, that those qualifications that have under 100 learner registrations that were funded for full-time learners, those qualifications are being defunded. So for us, for the BTEC suite, that is the diploma size qualifications in civil engineering and building services engineering. The reason why we're not too worried about that is that those qualifications are mainly used for apprentices, and apprenticeship funding is still protected. So those will carry on. So on our systems, you'll continue to be able to register on them. But if you try to put a funded learner on them from July, August for the 25 year, then you wouldn't get funding for it. Everything else, the decision has been made for everything else to follow the principle of the T-level overlap and redevelop in the new reform qualifications. So that was the first step. The second step is that the new AAQs, alternative academic qualifications we developed, I'll come on to talk about in a minute, and new technical qualifications in subjects like construction, they will continue to be made available for first teach in September 25. So that's qualifications developed under the reform process that the previous government put in place. The qualifications that, excuse me, so BTEC national qualifications, for example, an A-level size 360 GLH qualifications, will be defunded because we've got a new qualification available. The study program rules, where you had to put 2 A-levels alongside this new vocational qual, the AAQ in construction, that's been scrapped. So that's actually more flexible than it was before. So you can put together a study program within reason that is right for your learners. You don't have to do A-levels alongside that. And each sector, as I say, each sector's funding has been set, decisions have been made, bespoke decisions for each sector. So construction, effectively what we see in construction is more defunding happened because they think the T-level largely at level 3 works quite well for design, surveying, planning, versus other sectors like, for example, engineering. I think there's too big a risk in removing everything that potentially overlaps. So they've given themselves some more time in engineering. The list then, this is how it looks on the basis of that. You've got, from 2025, you've got a vast majority for full-time learners. Apprentices are still fine. Full-time learners, all you've got available that's funded is the new 360 size AAQ. So that's the alternative academic qualification, which is the extended certificate, which I'll come on to talk about. All other sizes of qualification remain defunded because of the content overlap with the T-level. So the government want you to, if you've got a learner who's really interested in construction, want to specialise in it, and they're not doing an apprenticeship, then their recommendation is to do the T-level. And in the main, that would be the design, surveying, planning T-level that covers the footprint of these types of qualifications. So it's something that we've got to market in. We've been delivering this type of qualifications for technicians for some time, for budding technicians, and it's the T-level now that you'd need to use if they want anything bigger than a single A-level size qualification in construction. So some implications on how to plan a curriculum and what you can mix and match with and so on. Excuse me. So when planning the curriculum for next year, it's important to consider funding implications. So when we've had a nested, we call it nested suite of qualifications with all the sizes, you can top up and drop down and so on. If you've got a learner that started, that is starting or has just started this year or is starting next year on a smaller size qualification, wants to top up, you need to be careful because you wouldn't be able to do that if it's not funded for next year. So you'd need to be registered on the size of qualification that intended certificate for before the funding cutoff date. So if you were going to do a 540 foundation diploma and next year you want to top them up to a 1080, you need to get them registered by the end of this summer. You need to get them registered summer term. You need to get them registered on the bigger size and do some kind of teaching just before the end of term in order to get that funding for next year. So they wouldn't get their result for the 540, but they'll carry on forward, those results carry on forward to the 1080. Dropping down, if they have achieved the bigger size, excuse me, falling back or dropping down, the only smaller size that's available after this year will, of course, be the new AAQ, and that's got different units and different assessments, so it's not possible to drop down from that. So that's something to be aware of. Perhaps some unintended consequences of this policy, but something to be aware of when you're planning your curriculum. You can't quite deliver in the way that you maybe had before when we had the full range of sizes available. Transferring a learner, there is various guidance on that, and you'll get the slide deck for this with the links in. And this just explains really broadly about how the process works and what we do, that there's a charge for it, and what a top-up versus what a transfer is. So not possible to top up learners after this year. So study programs. So one bit of good news then is that the study program requirement of one construction AAQ plus 2 A-levels, that might be great for schools, less good for colleges. That requirement has been scrapped. This new government has said you can create whatever study program you want with available funded qualifications. I think there would be an issue if you tried to overly duplicate it. So if you had some construction, well, I can't think of an example, but if you had qualifications that were more or less identical, smaller and then bigger size, I don't think that would be allowed. But you essentially you can design study programs that are right for your learners, bearing in mind the destination of your learner might be to university. You check that the university they want to potentially go to, or the types of universities that courses they want to do potentially would accept the combination you're putting together. We have got some examples here. We designed a qualification really as a STEM qualification to to complement A levels. So we still think it's valid and a good combination to combine it with things like maths or design technology or physics or even art and design. So we've got some examples up here on the slide deck that I'm showing that shows how you could put those programs together. You could also combine it in sort of STEM subjects with other BTECs. So you could avoid A levels completely if you wanted. So you could have AAQ in engineering alongside this. We've got AAQs in computing. So there are things that you could do in design or built environment or engineering perhaps that are slightly outside of traditional built environment faculties that nevertheless would be a useful combination of subjects. So there are more options now, I think, for these new AAQs than there were perhaps a month ago. And as I've said, the recommendations are subject to individual university accepting that particular combination, because they may restrict how many BTECs you present with, or how many different types of BTECs you can combine. So here's a comparison to the current or legacy extended certificate and the new AAQ extended certificate. The content, I would say, in the main, the content is pretty similar. If they've doing the mandatory units and the common mandatory from groups A and B, you're going to cover fairly similar content that you would cover in the new one. We actually have a bit more optionality in the new one. So we know, particularly schools, for example, not just schools, but some colleges may be less au fait with the more advanced modeling or the latest developments in retrofit. They may want to put learners on a different combination. So we've got a choice. You still have to do 2 out of that group of 3. So you essentially, you've still got an exam in the maths and the science. You've still got, and here you've got an exam on construction technology. So understanding how buildings are put together. It's pretty standard stuff you would have been teaching for some time if you've done the BTEC before. And then everyone does a design unit as well, and they get a bit hands-on with some fairly basic processes in CAD. And then you can either specialize further in modeling using things like Revit to further those design skills. You can do something on retrofit, which is like a project based on an existing property that they look at, they do a basic survey on it, and then come up with retrofit solutions that are appropriate, so recommendations to improve energy efficiency. Or they could do commercial management unit, which is much more about the costing and the sort of project management side to respond to scenarios. And for all of these, we have an authorized brief that we set and we provide. So you can't write your own briefs for those. There's obviously the brief for something like retrofit is pretty broad. The brief for modeling or commercial management gives them it will give them a set of information they need to respond to, and it will be more specific. So here's a summary of the key similarities, differences between the old and new. Like I say, the content is pretty similar. What a learner needs to know as a foundation level 3 course in construction hasn't really changed. We've refreshed and updated the content, of course we have, and we've got it validated particularly with universities and professional bodies. Excuse me. But we have more or less kept the same content. Design is still in there, math and science exams. The grading structure is pretty much the same. The standards verification model is the same. The the sort of the best stuff from uh, the best stuff we feel that the better stuff from the older BTEC, the current BTEC National, has been retained and built into these new units. Health and safety as well is not its own unit, but it's embedded in a few different content areas. So in terms of resources and support, we've got training for things like getting ready to teach and getting ready for internal assessment. We'll start that this term, and then we've got more further workshops and events in the summer term. There's some videos. I think these are generic videos as opposed to most of these. I think are generic videos rather than specific to construction, but I think there will be some specific to construction. When you get the slide deck, you'll see that there's a link there you can find out, and it'll allow you to book onto the events when they come available. The support, this hasn't really changed. This slide just indicates to remind you that the supports that we already have in place for BTEC Nationals, a web page to explain that, exam wizard, which has the past papers that will be built in time. Obviously, at the moment we've got the sample assessments, obviously to look at for those, and sample assignments. Teaching and learning support, including access, for example, to Evren, subject advisor, and myself. You can contact us, contact Evren, teaching construction at pearson.com, and then you can have a chat with him or both of us, or we can come back to you by email. Access to scripts, so post results to understand how learners have done well or how they need to improve. And the results plus as well, the analysis that helps you in that as well to break down how they've performed. And subject advisors, so I've said. Excuse me. So paid for resources. These are student books, which will be available. I think some samples are coming fairly soon, within the next month or so, and then the publication is planned for April. And then teacher packs, which is further resources. So these are essentially textbooks, but there's also teacher packs as well, which are resources to help you teach practically. And there's a link there as well that you can access, and that's where they'll be available. This is just our summary of our offer across the new AAQs that we are launching for September. Planning and delivery guide. I think these are free documents. This is like a bit like schemes of work. It's got some very specific for each unit, very specific suggestions of how you can teach and how you can introduce topics and activities you can do to help embed the learning. And then the published resources I've just mentioned, and the sample assessment material is already out there. I urge you to have a look at that if you're going to do this from September, to see what's in store for the assessments. And hopefully you'll find that all fairly easy to engage with. So just in terms of the reform, then to cover level 2, in case you're interested in that, this is the post-16 level 2 reform, because I haven't looked at the sort of 14 to 16 key stage 4 at this point. That will come in due course with the curriculum assessment review. So post-16 level 2 reform, as you may recall, this was a very complex requirements for new qualifications, which had different categories of qualification we had to redevelop according to where a learner was going to go to, if they were going to go to a T level or an apprenticeship, if they knew which apprenticeship they wanted to go to, or if they were going to go to academic study in that sector. There were all these different, something like 8 different categories for construction in that first cycle. Fortunately, this has been paused. This reform has been paused. Now, they've obviously looked at it and thought this is quite complicated. It's potentially causing more qualification proliferation, which they didn't want. And essentially, it means that, yes, we did In fact, we have started to develop a qualification for construction, but we've obviously not been able to submit that. So as it stands, essentially the message is you can still deliver the qualifications that you have done before for post-16 learners. So we've kept these available. So that could be, for example, the BTEC Firsts, the Diploma in Construction Occupations, the BTEC Specialist, which could be used to introduce an apprenticeship or to underpin an apprenticeship. And of course, we got a range of MVQs that can be done by any age post 16, which are for when they are in work, and you can generate workplace evidence, and that would be underpinned by a BTEC such as the BTEC Diploma in Construction Occupation still. This next slide is just useful links. So the things like the funding guide, and our level 3 reforms page, where you can find out the information like the table of qualifications I've shared with you, for example, and the DFE links, which details the specific outcomes for the qualifications and for each sector. And for construction, for example, they focused on, is the T-level working? Is the T-level not working? They've obviously made some conclusions about design, surveying, planning, and found that it's sufficient and that's low risk to defund, so that they are defunding the qualifications that overlap with design, surveying, planning. Whereas with on-site construction, for example, they felt that it wasn't working, so they are going to stop that, and therefore qualification in on-site, that sort of area, may still be deliverable or may need to be resubmitted under new requirements. They may accept those. So the picture is very different to engineering, where they've largely kept everything for a couple of years until the car review concludes. And then again, for later subjects, generally things are protected till at least 2027. We've got there's some FAQs from the DFE. We've got FAQs on our website as well, specifically around BTEC. So next steps. So just to really summarize, so they paused the submissions for cycle 2, level 2 and 3. That doesn't really affect it doesn't really affect construction, but we did have an academic progression qualification in construction that we were going to submit for post 16 level 2. We're no longer going to submit that unless the reform concludes that we can later on this year. They are going to open a new cycle 2 for additional qualifications and the construction is in there in construction, but I think that is just small qualifications, like if a awarding body has not managed to submit an alternative academic qualification, they get a chance to do that. I think it may cover things like on-site as well, on-site qualifications at level 3. I don't think there are many of them. I think majority is level 2 for the trades. So we are not looking at submitting anything further for this cycle that will open in March. For other sectors, qualifications that need to be retained long term will be reformed according to the outcomes of the curriculum and assessment review. This is the big review that looks at level 2 and level 3 across academic and vocational, to make some conclusions about how the qualifications need to look, how they should be assessed, what sector titles that they should be covered, what should be covered at school, what colleges should be doing, and so on. So a very big review. They're going to publish some interim findings in the spring and then the full findings in the autumn. And after that, we'll then know if we need to develop further qualifications in all sectors, including construction. In the main, we anticipate that centres will still need to switch some provision in 2027 to new reform qualifications, but largely for construction, for level 3 at least, we think it's broadly stable, broadly fit for purpose. The DFE conclude that. Therefore, we don't think there will be too much change further at level 3, but it's still speculation on our part. Other sectors will probably have more change. So just for last slide, then, this is your contact details. Everyone who's on the call, you can reach him at that address. There's links there to join the groups, the various VQ and T level groups, and you can book a short Teams meeting with Evan as well, or email me direct, or you can phone our customer support line.